Well, okay, I'd say let's get cracking here. So let's see. Paul, do we expect others of your team that we should be waiting for before I say, hey, let's get going? Should we wait on Tom and Katie fast?
Tom and Katie should be coming in. Yeah.
Okay. From a version control perspective, if you want to have a version in front of you, I can share screen, but if you're looking to have something in front of you on your screen while we're not sharing screen, I'm planning to use the version that Mark sent this afternoon, which includes Tom's edits as well as Mark's edits and the edits that were outstanding from last meeting.
Works for me.
Okay.
Works for me.
And then Bob and Mark, I'm gonna leave it to you to integrate Brett's stuff as appropriate. I think he's trying to just kind of from a historic perspective, try to bring in relevant pieces from the past governance work, but be helpful if you can kind of channel those as you feel appropriate. All right. So that said, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and pull this up. And let's see if I've got the right one here. Okay, so this is Tom and Mark. You all able to see that? So let's start with the mission elements here. And as a reminder to folks, we had the original 11 drawn from the principles developed by the advisory committee. Bob Salinger took and made a stab at consolidating those. We integrated feedback, I believe, from Paul Beck, Melissa, and Keith into that. OSU has now weighed in, and Mark has further refined. The purple and pink highlights are Tom and Mark's respectively. So I'm gonna see if folks had a chance to look at these, and if so, any reactions. Again, the default, if we're gonna spend a month of Sundays on this, is to go back to the original 11, knowing that the advisory committee already agreed to them. And Tom, is Tom on yet? No, or Paul, are you in a position that you could describe the university's thinking in terms of integrating this, or you or Katie?
Well, I'd rather Tom did it. I'm
Okay.
trying to find him.
That's okay. We can I can skip to another section. We got plenty of work to do.
That might be a good idea, because I actually I had some responses or some things to say about some of what Tom had suggested. Not that I disagreed with his intentions or motives, but just the role of the mission statement in a piece of legislation. There were some things that he was looking for that I wasn't sure we could accomplish in that section. So,
Okay, good. We'll wait on Tom then. And likewise, we'll do the same, unless, Paul, would you prefer that we cover this authorities and the edits here when Tom's around as well? Paul and Paul, should we wait on this authority section?
Sorry, I was trying to call Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Go
I'll
ahead.
just say I think we should, because
I think we've looked at like Brett's language and feel like it's covered, and Tom, I think, has some collective edits related to like the HCP. So I think
Okay.
we should wait for him. Apologize for that.
No problem. All right, roles and responsibilities. I think we are still settled, so I'm not gonna like, other than Peggy, your suggestion, any concerns about reordering board first executive director and land board, sort of the structuring of these? Okay,
Who are you asking?
the whole group. Peggy had made that suggestion today, just simply about reordering to have the executive director fall.
I don't want to step in.
The board of directors.
I don't want to step in front of members of the working group, but we have a couple of things we want to mention about the executive director.
Okay.
There are two bullets that I don't think are going to make it through legislative council bill drafting. And it's not that we have a problem with the substance of them, but just gonna point it out now. The second bullet that says, due to the need of research connection, the ED will become an OSU employee on leave. It's a little hard to think about how that translates into a statute. And the last bullet, legislature, I don't think we can legislate who the governor puts into our natural resource or his natural resource cabinet. That's a function of the governor's office and the governor's decision. So those two things we're gonna probably shed pretty quickly when we start working with Ledge Council. So I just didn't want to have any false expectations about them.
Jeff, is your suggestion to leave them in?
My suggestion would be to take them out, because I don't want later on for folks to, members of the public or advisory committee or others, to kind of say we haven't, we didn't accomplish what we set out to. So I think we should be shaping our legislative concept to reflect what a legislative concept can and can't do at the outset, and kind of be realistic about that.
Jeff, are you saying that we couldn't do that later?
I'm just saying that I don't know how we have a piece of legislation that says that the executive director is going to be an OSU employee on leave to the Elliott State Research Forest entity that the legislature is creating. And we certainly can't have a piece of legislation that tells the governor who's going to be on his or her cabinet.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm echoing here, sorry. Okay.
I think at some point we had a conversation about having a side list of things that would be more appropriately in bylaws. And both of those things would be kind of on that list as I looked through the bill or the draft today, thinking about that.
I guess my initial reaction to that is the language about engaging on the Natural Resource Council.
Sorry, Mark. I don't know what we're dealing with here.
Well, it's soft language. It says may engage. So my preference would be to leave it in there. If they think they can't write that into legislation, that's okay. But there's nothing mandating the governor to do anything. It's helping to describe the breadth of that position.
I agree, Mark. I see a lot of this as being helpful background for whoever does the drafting, just so they understand where we're coming from. I don't know if there's a better spot to put it or to color code it to make it clear that we think some of this is frankly dicta, but I think it will be helpful for legislative council for understanding where we're coming from without having to watch all of our tapes back and try to figure it out.
One question I have too, I know with OFPA, they're actually trying to draft it with the lawyers prior to handing it to Ledge Council, so that we don't wind up, so that there's a good deal of legal thought going in on the first draft, and we don't get back sort of a mess from Ledge Council. And I don't know if we have the capacity in this process to do that or the time, but we're on the same timeline as they are. It's just something to think about. Ledge Council is going to be going through a god awful number of bills really fast.
We are planning on working with them. That and we have a ledge council person that we think has been assigned, so we will be able to have back and forth. And Malia and Ryan Mann from the treasurer's office are going to be working directly with ledge council along with DOJ, and I'll be there too. So I'm just pointing out, you know, what goes into legislation, what doesn't go into legislation, and those two things stood out as we were going through the draft today.
So
Hey,
Jeff,
if I add to that, oh, sorry, Peter.
well, I was going to try to bring resolution to this. So if you've got something else to add, get it out there.
I just was going to Jeff's point. I think that the way that Melissa framed it is a good way to be thinking about this, and a good reminder as we go in. All of the back and forth and the language that we have, this is going to help provide ledge council with the understanding and the background of the desire and the intent of this group. And as Jeff said, you know, we do have a drafter, and we are planning on making sure that, you know, DOJ, who has also been working with OSU's attorneys, et cetera, are part of the original drafting process, so that, you know, as much as possible, we start with a first draft that reflects what this group wants as closely as possible. And then obviously we'll go from there. But I think the way that Melissa had kind of framed that as this being helpful background, but also with Jeff's point of keeping in mind that keeping our expectations in check of what we submit to LC versus understanding that the language we get back may look different, but we're doing everything we can to make sure that the intent of this group is reflected accurately as soon as possible.
Okay, so my sense is leave it in, if they decide to take it out, and this is going to apply to any sort of, once you see the legislation, the draft legislation, there's going to be a thorough review. There may be items that you want to go back and say we need, or we really strongly encourage you to reinsert these. There are others that they may say, no, we're not going to do it. And we need to figure at that point, do they fall away, or is there a different repository for keeping those? And that is, I think, Jeff, to your point, bylaws or something like that. So anybody have problem with keeping the language in here with the flag that there is a potential that it doesn't make it into the final legislation? Okay. Jeff, did you have others on the ED or?
Oh, that was it.
Okay. Why don't we, I think Tom DeLuca, you've joined us now. Are you with us?
Yeah, sorry, we had a little crisis here.
Nope, no problem. But it does mean that we are going to put you directly on the spot for suggested edits to the mission statement that you made, and talking us through those.
Yeah, sure. I think I put comments with most of the changes so that you could see what our thinking was, but I'm happy to walk through them. There was a few key things. Number one, we thought we could front load this bullet number one with some of the material that was in bullet number 9. So we changed it to providing an enduring publicly owned. We emphasize that it's publicly owned, so that's right up front in the first bullet. Research forest managed to support scientific inquiry led by Oregon State University. So the public ownership emphasizes the public entity. And then maybe before I move on, let's go down to bullet 9. That one said advancing, no, it was the old bullet 9. Maintaining a high level of public accountability and transparency. I didn't delete it, but I guess that I'm confused. Let's see. Oh, with regard to transparency, this is a problem to just say that every activity on the forest will be transparent. Because research, when you submit grant proposals, you don't share that information outward, in a public forum, because someone else picks up the idea, runs with it, and gets the grant. So there is a level of confidentiality in publishing, in any, in grant writing. And so that's why when it said all aspects, we just changed it to all the, so I didn't delete that, but there was some, I think I pulled out, the accountability. It said here, govern with transparency and accountability. That remains in bullet 9. And here, just the public ownership. So there was redundancy between 1 and 9. And so we only needed 9, but the all aspects needed to be changed. And then bullet 2.
Can I just stop there, since those two were interrelated? Let me see if anybody have any questions for Tom on that, or concerns with the edits? Because I'd like you to raise them now, and I'd like to, if we can, tick these off one by one as we go for agreement.
I have a question. I guess, Tom, I didn't read the original bullet as mandating anything that would be confidential because of a research submittal or something. But I just wanting to double check that the university legal counsel, and I don't know whether this is true or not, whether there's any question about the public documents, public document requirements of state law applying to.
No, it was just
work products.
I don't think so. It was just where it said transparency in all aspects of it. Well, that was accountability and transparency.
As long as there's not an ambiguous category around that.
Yeah. Right. No.
So Jeff, how are you understanding that public records law would apply to, for example, OSU as a manager of this forest?
That it would apply, because public records law applies to the university generally and I just don't know the ins and outs of if Matt Betts has a research proposal or a publication that's pending, how that is, what the advice is on that and how that relates to it, for instance.
It must be in the OHSU.
Yeah. But the assumption we've had, Bob, is that the public documents and public meeting laws would apply to the operation of the forest, and but within the context of embargoes on publications and things like that are pretty, Tom, I think are pretty routine at the university, in spite of the meetings laws and the public documents applying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me go back to my question, 1 and 8. Anybody have any lingering questions, concerns with the proposed modification?
I don't, but I think that it wouldn't be a public document until we accepted the research proposal. I mean,
It was submitted.
I'd say make those lines black.
Say more about what you mean, Paul.
Oh, accept them.
Okay, good. Accept them.
Change the
That's what I
color.
wanted to hear.
Yes.
Okay, I'll go to 2 because I know we're in a bit of tight time frame here. Here we put public ownership in the first bullet, so stating that we ensure public ownership isn't needed in the second. So we say ensuring public access, and then just specifying for recreational and educational purposes, because that was in a lower bullet. And that is compatible with scientific purpose and practice of the research forest. In other words, if you have sensitive equipment in a specific place, you don't have a mountain bike trail going right through that area, or if there's an experiment going on that would be disturbed by a recreational activity, you would cordon that off.
You took out ecological goals of the forest there. Was there a reason for that? Because originally it was scientific purposes and ecological goals or something like that.
I didn't take that out. It wasn't there. It said in perpetuity is what I took out.
This has gotten.
Mhm.
Yep. So,
But we could add in and the ecological goals of the research practice and ecological goals. I think.
I mean,
I think it's fine as it is.
yeah, but
Yeah,
Bob,
yeah,
I think the
ecos-
question is less what,
No,
what was there.
I don't agree. I mean, I think recreation needs to be consistent both with the scientific research, but also the natural resource protections that have been committed to. I mean,
So-
a big piece of the HCP is.
So, yes, what if we just added ecological? For recreational, educational, ecological purposes. Oh, that's access though. That's specific to access.
Right.
It's ensuring
Right.
public access.
Public access needs to be consistent with needs to be compatible with the scientific purpose and ecological goals of the forest.
Do we need to throw in other modifiers in there, Bob, like an economic goals of the forest or, something like that? I mean,
I don't think so,
just
actually,
didn't
because I
necessarily-
think where the conflicts with
Why?
recreation typically occur are with environmental protections. That's where we see the real conflicts with recreation, not so much with economic purposes.
But see, I see it with economic purposes in my world because if we have a trail and there's doing logging through it, then, it pretty much removes access for that period of time where people can't go out and hunt because they're doing logging.
Well,
I just add though on the logging piece, that would be part of the research platform. So I think it is covered in that because we wouldn't be doing, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong here, we wouldn't be doing, logging that isn't part of our research plan. So I think we see those one-on-one.
This is helpful though. The ecological part is not part of the research plan.
It is.
So I appreciate you bringing that up.
But there's a difference between research on the environment and actually protecting the environment. Those are not the same things.
Well, but the scientific purpose seeks to, yeah. Okay.
And that's why I separated out scientific purpose and actually had an ecological goal separate from that in one of the last draft, I guess it was. Looks like they've been mushed together again.
Well, no, this was the draft. This is writing off the draft you sent, Bob.
Mhm.
So it wasn't in the version with the only, 10 bullets.
I'll find the version I sent.
Hey, Bob, this is Keith. Does the phrase scientific and conservation purposes fit?
Yeah. That gets there.
Because those purposes are clearly stated. I mean, they're part of the ACP and the FMP. So that I think is hardly controversial. What is comment from all?
So I just added it in there so people could see what you were suggesting as an option there, Keith. Not saying that anybody's agreed to it yet.
I'm comfortable with that.
Melissa, Paul?
I'm fine. I'm worried about the fact that we're on number 2 and it's 5 o'clock and
Yeah.
all those things.
Okay.
Change the color.
Got it. Done. Onward.
Okay, so advancing long-term operational research. We basically went back and grabbed the previous bullet that was there before because it now just said advancing forest health, and that isn't adequate. That's health, especially, is just, it's a vague term that is difficult to define, and it doesn't really belong here. We're advancing long-term operational scale research in partnership with OSU on alternative forest management practices, ecosystem function, biodiversity, habitat conservation, water quality and quantity, carbon, etc. And resilience of forest to impacts of climate change to the benefit of all Oregonians. So I think Mark added the benefit of all Oregonians.
So
So
my
it's just-
my version was 3 then ago, because what I had was advancing ecosystem health, including all that chain
Oh.
of things, and then that all got erased and it became advancing ecosystem health. But I did separate out ecosystem health from the research, because I think it's important to actually, ecosystem health again is different than research on ecosystem health.
I think that that's fine, but we need to explicitly have one that is focused on the operational scale research.
I agree.
It's set of objectives, but it's not, it's for multiple objectives.
I would agree with you, Tom. I think there needs to be one on the research, and I think there needs to be one on the environment.
Okay.
Bob, will you put in the chat the language you'd like included, and I'll try to drop it in so people can see it. In the meantime, does anybody have concerns with me accepting all of the suggested edits to an inclusion of item 3?
Well, what I would say, Peter, is I would break 3 into 2: advancing long-term operational research in partnership with OSU on alternative forest management, whatever you want there, and then I would put the environmental stuff in a separate bullet, basically.
No, but we want the research to be explicitly addressing this diversity of objectives.
Yeah, I think Tom wants those in the research as well.
I'm fine with them in both, but we have economic stuff broken out separately. We have recreation broken out separately. I'm not sure why the environment gets stuffed under.
No, that's what I'm suggesting, is that you develop that. If you would put in the chat the bullet you would like included in here as a new 3 or 4.
Yeah, totally happy with that, Bob. I don't want to lose the.
Okay.
Let me go back to my question. Anybody have concerns with me accepting all suggested edits, modifications to number 3 as it's written right now?
I would love to see, for the benefit of local communities and all Oregonians.
We've already got rural livelihoods in there, which to me is a little bit of an outlier with everything else in that line. So that's what.
Well, the benefits of the Elliott are not just livelihoods for the local community.
I think for the benefit of all Oregonians, honestly, is I don't know what that means. I mean, I think it's another term that could get yanked out by. I like it as a, I don't know, an aspiration, but I think in terms of legal language, I don't think that has much meaning here. I think all the other terms are fairly concrete. And then we're talking about some sort of esoteric benefit for all Oregonians that we would have disagreements on what that actually looks like.
Mark, are you okay with it coming out?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess my point is that in all of the purpose here, there's really no mention for the rest of the state. There's a call out for the rural and local communities, but not for sort of the shared benefit or ownership of the rest of the residents of Oregon.
All right, good enough. Tom, you're on to 4.
Okay, this was modified from promoting rural economies, oh God, I can't read what it said before, but we changed it to be explicit through active forest management, timber harvest, recreation and research. So that I can't remember what it read before. It was just supporting rural economies, I think, and we wanted to be explicit about what those were. And it was interesting. We had a meeting this afternoon with the forest research forest directors, which included a variety of people from, it's not just research forest, we also had LLC forest director that, and tribal in terms of Colin was part of that meeting. And Dave Rolfe from TNC, and Dave, they all agreed that we need to be very explicit about the profit motive to make the forest self-sufficient to achieve all these objectives. It needs to be spelled out clearly in the mission. And if it's not, then it will get lost. They were very concerned that the forest would.
I think everybody's okay with this idea being here. I think the question is, are we okay with the actual words? Anybody have any concerns with the words included in item 4?
That emphasis on that self-sufficiency piece, that
Isn't that covered in number 7?
it's timber harvest. It's going to, yeah.
2 different things.
So
Yes, these are 2 different things, but
Yeah.
I'm fine with 4 the way it's worded now.
okay, anybody have any concerns with 4, the way it's worded currently? Okay. Moving on. 5.
I don't think, with that one, the old 5, we said, I don't know why, we deleted it because we said it was now captured in bullet 2. But somebody put it back and added economic, which I don't have a problem with it, just we were trying to reduce redundancy. Because we had education in bullet 2.
I think it needs to be in there, and I mean,
I'm okay with it.
You're gonna do the research, but you need to somehow communicate what that research tells us at all levels of education. I think it's an important thing to be back in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to spend time on it, but just an overarching kind of comment from us is that in the construct of a piece of legislation, the mission statement, sometimes it's better to have some redundancy, but have things blocked out topic by topic by topic, so that there's a clear benchmark that an action can be looked at against number 5 or number 6. And so sometimes combining to reduce the number is maybe contrary to what we want to accomplish. So just in that context, just think about it before we combine everything. It's okay.
So I'm not hearing a call for pulling it out. I've been hearing a call to keep item 5 in. Anybody have a problem with keeping item 5 in? Okay. 6.
We just shortened this because we felt that the broader statement was more inclusive, and it started getting choked up with the way it was written. We didn't, it wasn't a major thing, just trying to streamline. So
Melissa, can I ask you to weigh in on this one? I think you had developed some of the original language, and given your background, I'm wondering if you might have a thought on this.
No, I mean, I was trying to get at the issue that we always run into, like with the Forest Service, which was the harvesting of traditional cultural products, like for basket weaving or digging camas root or that kind of thing. If that's covered, I think that would be the majority of the tribal concerns, although I'm always really hesitant to speak for the tribes.
Yes. So does this cover it, do you think, sufficiently? And again, not asking you to speak for the tribes, just drawing on your background and experience.
I'm not sure that the phrase traditional ecological knowledge in forest practices is really what I was trying to get at. I think
Yeah.
it's more traditional cultural tribal practices.
What if it said traditional ecological knowledge and traditional forest practice and use? Or something like that.
Well, I mean, the tribes aren't asking to come up and burn swaths of land.
Right. I know.
What they want to do, at least, what we have wanted to do in the past when I was an attorney for the tribe was, engage in harvest of traditional items such as camas root, reeds, mushrooms, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I still feel like it's traditional tribal cultural practices and first foods. I mean, it's a first foods issue.
Does that help?
What are you trying to get at with the phrase ecological knowledge?
Yeah, I'm with Melissa. I'm not sure it just doesn't end at practices with the cultural practices.
Traditional.
I think it
ecological-
does.
The tribes, I've heard the tribes talk a lot about traditional ecological knowledge. I mean, I don't care if it stays
that-
or not, but they do talk about that.
It's an
That's
explicit.
usually related to forest management, though, Bob. I mean, like at least in my experience.
I think
Are the tribes wanting to co-manage?
Can I make a suggestion? I think, Jeff, you're in the process of doing outreach related to both this sort of maybe more specifically around representation. Would you be willing to float this by the advisory committee members from the tribes that are present on that and see if they have suggestions and integrate those or send them to the group?
Sure, I could do that easily. I've got a couple of calls coming up just to talk through what's going on. So I would be happy to if you want and report back.
Okay.
So Peter, before you go to 7, it looks like I did add one in below 6 that seems to have disappeared, which was, and I don't have my old draft here in front of me anymore, but promoting collaborative, inclusive decision-making and partnerships and, something along those lines that gets at the fact that this has been born of a collaborative process. It's supposed to make, I think there should be one in there that gets at that issue. Was it taken out for a reason? Can you see what it said previously on your draft?
I thought that was number 8, where it said prioritizing collaborative structures and partnerships that recognize the value. I didn't.
It's not,
You can see
number 8
there
doesn't say
wasn't a
that.
deletion there. It was.
Tom,
Yeah.
we're not seeing that. I don't know if you're looking at the share screen, but the version that we're looking at does not have that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. The version I'm looking at.
Doesn't have what? While prioritizing collaborative structures, I'm seeing it on number 7.
There we are. Excuse me, I apologize.
So they got combined again. I mean, I'm where Jeff is at. What I was trying to do was separate out these things so you could see them as distinct goals, as opposed to, managing as financially self-sustaining operation is not the same as prioritizing collaborative structures, partnerships. That those are just totally different concepts that we've pushed together for no reason particularly here. So I would go back to the prior language, which is to maintain a financially sufficient entity capable of operating and managing the forest and necessary infrastructure
Yep.
period, and then break out a number 8, prioritizing collaborative structures and partnerships, and building relationships between diverse stakeholders. I think is what I had, or something very close to that.
I'm fine with that, Bob. I didn't, I thought you deleted a bunch of gobbledygook. I didn't,
No, I don't think that's gobbledygook. I think that's actually pretty important.
oh, no, I'm not saying that is. You're the one that used the expression gobbledygook.
I know. And so what I tried to do, Tom, was actually break them. I tried to separate stuff out so that you could go down and see
Oh,
research, recreation, financial sustainability, collaboration, sort of broke them out into discrete things. Because what I felt was that a lot of these had 3 or 4 concepts in them, kind of randomly joined by
I see.
conjunctions.
I'm fine with 8.
I'm
I'm
okay
fine
with,
7.
Okay. Good. 7 and 8. And Bob, I'm going to go back and look at your original language. That's why I've highlighted it, and we'll get the second part of that sentence tuned up.
Great, thank you.
Knowing that the tribal item 6 is a bit up in the air yet, and Bob, I'm waiting on your suggested language related to conservation values or whatever the right terminology is there. Knowing that there's going to be one more insertion in that. Everybody good with the mission? Anybody have concerns about the mission? All right, that's one. One more. Nice work. All right. Item 3, authorities. And Tom, you're going to be on here first with the suggestion of fully evaluate potential and potentially participate in available ecosystem services.
until to say we would participate was too explicit without, so we just wanted it left a bit more broad to say that we would evaluate and then potentially participate in ecosystem services or carbon offsets or carbon markets. And we were also thinking to say it, we might want to say something like, to the extent consistent with the mission of the ESRF. In other words, as long as it's consistent with the mission above, then yes, we'll fully consider it and potentially participate in these different activities.
So this section is exclusively about giving the approval, is about what authority does the entity have in order to undertake its mission. And so the authority has to be to participate in those things, which would not preclude evaluating and deciding not to.
Right.
But the legislation needs to give the authority to participate.
Right, I see. I was reading it more like you will participate. But,
And so it all hinges off that very first bullet that says, with the approval of the board of directors, the entity has authorities necessary to, and then it's, enter into the contracts, oversee land management, participate in this, receive, hold, comply, just kind of those action verbs. So
yeah, so sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
no, I just think that the
I get it.
shorter this can be, the better. And I think I read someplace, and Melissa might have been the author of the comment on the very first bullet, that some of the additions actually begin to raise the question about, well, if there are these 6 things, then is number 7 not anticipated and therefore there's no authority to do it, as opposed to taking the approach of having a broader language of entering into and administering contracts and agreements needed to perform authorized functions, period.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I would put the carbon thing in the same category. The more we add, the more question there comes later on about whether the authority exists, if it's something that wasn't anticipated when we were drafting.
Yeah, okay. So for the first bullet, we had changed that to including but not limited to for that reason, but we can just delete all those specifics if we feel they're not necessary. And that goes for Brett was adding the HCP in, and
I think this goes into we'll give it in the context to the Ledge Council drafter, that list. But we may have a conversation with them about their advice on keeping it short versus having included but not limited to. But on the carbon market thing, I think we feel pretty strongly, it has to be authority to participate and then the evaluation.
okay, I'm okay with that. Peter, then would you just add the,
Can I just add something on that? I think in this discussion, and I have to apologize, everyone. I had an evening meeting that I'm driving to. I do think that for all those items, there needs to be a reminder back that they have to be consistent with the mission. I think that's where we get a little nervous on the carbon piece, is that
Sure.
there isn't a carbon action that isn't consistent with the mission, along with any of those contracts. So I don't know if there needs to be an overarching statement in that, Jeff.
Yeah, and I think that the bullet itself talks about authorities that has to undertake its mission. And so we should, when we get the language back, be really clear about, making sure that that's the case.
well, could, where it says undertake actions necessary to, could you just add?
Can you guide me there?
He's at the
Right.
very first bullet under the header.
The third bullet under, oh, it's twice. So that one right there is, maybe we just don't even need that if it's above, but it's like consistent with the mission of the ESRF, undertake.
Yeah, I think I agree with Tom. You should just delete where your cursor is now. And those bullets that are below that should just be moved out to be circles like the rest of them. And then the very first bullet, we can adjust the language so that it's very clear that with the approval of the board of directors, it has the authority to undertake the following authorities consistent with its mission, and let the Ledge Council, that's enough direction for them that'll get us some good language, and Malia and I will mark it so we know to be looking.
Is there a need to have with the approval of the board of directors?
That was new language that was added after when I was on vacation. So I didn't want to argue with it, but I didn't think that it was necessary. No.
Our legal counsel thought it wasn't necessary.
Well, I think there gets I was just gonna say, I think it gets in a question on do all your HR contracts or other
Right.
items have to run, then everything has to run through the board then.
Anybody want to argue in favor of it? Okay. It's gone. Then let's take these pink bullets here. Is the suggestion to make them bullets as the above, and then determine with Ledge Council whether they belong or not? Did I hear that correctly?
Well, Peter, actually, no, I mean, you just glossed over that. I mean, typically those are board authorities and they're delegated down to an entity. And so, when the board works with OSU, those authorities would be delegated to it, but they are ultimately board authorities. Entering into those kinds of things are board responsibilities, not the manager's responsibilities ultimately. Right. So I think it is actually appropriate to have it there, and to be functional, it will be delegated.
I don't know. I'd leave it to, I don't know.
I tend to think that it's already stated that the board makes such decisions. I mean, that comes earlier. And I think Tom, it's understood, or Bob, excuse me, I think it's understood at this point that the board has significant authority.
I don't think the Elliott State Research Forest is a, I mean, we'll see what Ledge Council says, but the Elliott State Research Forest is a physical entity. It's a forest. you have to ascribe these kinds of responsibilities to an entity that exists as a decision-making body. So that would be either OSU or the board.
Well, that's like saying a
think going-
college
yeah.
is, I mean,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I think in terms of this document, though, we're talking about the ESRF is the entity in this. I mean, that's kind of our, perhaps a different name will come out of this, but ESRF is the name in this document that is the entity, which the board directs by their, the mission, the authorities and responsibilities we have down on the board below.
I would urge us to be intentional here. I think it should be clear who actually has the ultimate authority. Elliott State Research Forest will encompass a lot of different things, from the land board to the board to OSU. And I think actually designating where these things live will be important. I suspect the Ledge Council will do it for us if we don't
Yeah,
do it.
it may not be right in this spot, but it's fine to have it in this spot for our direction to them and let them figure out exactly where they want to put it.
I guess I'm just struggling with why we're choking on the board having that authority, because it really is a board authority. Big contracts, things like carbon credits and stuff like that are board authorities. They don't belong to OSU in this case. OSU didn't take ownership, and so they do live with the board. And if the board wants to delegate them, that's great. And if the board doesn't want to delegate them, that's also a board prerogative. It's not ambiguous in my mind. It is actually the board.
I agree with Bob. It is
Right.
every authority is the board authority, and
Yeah, that's-
maybe in recognizing that, just in parentheses, ESRF parentheses entity, and that authority rests with the board of that entity, all of them, including delegating some of the decision making.
I think it's fine to keep the board piece in there, Peter and Bob and
Yeah,
the company.
Okay,
And
good.
we will, it may not be there in that exact spot, but it'll be a good marker for the drafter.
It's back in. Okay, let's move on. Jeff, you had made a statement about the rest of these outlined authorities, and
I think that it was only that the bullets that remain should just be moved out to be the same as the other bullets. They are, if we're going to keep them, and we don't have any objections to them keeping them, but they're the same as the others. It's authorities that you want this entity to have.
Yeah. And I'll clean up the formatting, and then help me on the bonding, because that's still just a placeholder, and we have an outstanding question as to what that means from a couple of folks.
I did not suggest it. I don't know where it came from.
I put it in there, and it kind of originated from some of our earlier conversations where, part of the selling point of having this corporate entity is it might have the capacity to do bonding. So I put it in there.
If in fact we had a corporate entity, and we don't, I think we've been hearing loudly and clearly from you all that you prefer it not to be. So I think I have time with Department of Justice on Monday to discuss that very issue about if it is not a public corporation and it is a public entity / agency, what do we do about bonding authority, and what are our options? So I just don't know, Mark.
I would correct that, Jeff. I'm still in favor of a public corporation.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking Mark and Bob had been pushing for, and their group, to not have it be a public corporation.
I was guessing Mark put that in there for bonding. If there was litigation, that the litigants would have to put up a bond. Gosh, I was all excited.
I put it in there to help pay back the common school fund. But I'm okay taking it out if, we're not going that way at this point.
I think
that had been part of our conversation previously.
I actually like the idea of just having a placeholder to call it out. so that we know we've got an unresolved issue there. So that's fine.
And I just think it's important to keep remembering that what we don't give them authority to do, they can't do. What we do give them authority to do, they don't have to do. And so
That's right.
you know, I'll say I just went through this with the flood district for Portland. A lot of the legislation was written because of all the authorities that they weren't given, that they weren't allowed to do. So over the last like 5 decades, so we had to add all those authorities in. But it's really, you do as a public entity get restricted to what your allowances are.
Exactly why I think the placeholder is fine.
Hey, Jeff, are we going in a direction where we won't be this public entity?
No. I hope I didn't lead us down that pathway. No, it's always been that it will be a public entity. There are two buckets that we have to choose between. One is a public corporation and one is a public agency, if you will, authority.
Right.
And the only reason that we might choose to go that public corporation route is because of the possible flexibility we have on the financial side of things. And we just have not squared that up yet that I can say today which one it needs to be. We've just heard loud and clear from folks that there's a desire to not have it be a public corporation if a public agency / entity will do what needs to be done.
So help me understand why we need a bullet that says manage, maintain, protect, improve. I don't have a problem with it, but how is that an authority yet conducting research isn't an authority, I just am not clear. We have that thing up above that says includes but not limited to. I'm not 100% clear why the additional bullets were needed, but I don't have a problem with it. If it helps with the legislators to write it correctly, let's stick with it. But I'm just
It is another one of those things that's really vague.
Well, I think
my
the bullet-
definition of improve is totally different than some of the other folks on this Zoom meeting's definition of improve. That speaks to active management to me.
Mark, what were you going to say?
Well, are we talking about the bullet that starts manage, maintain, and protect?
I was just curious
I think
why you need an authority. Yeah.
I think the point there is really about having the authority in that capacity to interact with the adjacent landowners, basically.
Oh.
Well, but it doesn't say that, Mark, because it makes a flat statement first, and then it says including efforts with surrounding. And if it's really targeted toward interacting with the surrounding lands, then it should say authority to interact and participate in efforts with surrounding federal, state, tribal, local ownerships related to blah, blah, blah. I read it the way Tom read it. So
I think you're right. It's got the cart in front of the horse a little bit, because the point being there, I believe, is having the authority to make whatever arrangements and relationships and partnerships you need with your surrounding landowners.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you. Can we
So,
do a revision of that later?
Mark, can I ask you to right now into the chat, do a revised version of this and send it to me so I can get it included?
Yeah, I'll try. It's sort of hard with multiple screens here to.
No, I know. Trust me, I feel your pain.
And you've got there's some redundancy up to the first bullet that's shown on the page there, oversee the land management. And we have the same language there about the functioning condition of the forest. So there's some overlap on those two. To where maybe that first part goes away and it's just the part that Mark is calling to in the latter portion.
Here.
So Mark, make sure you don't use functioning condition in your rewrite.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I think we talked through ED. Anything else here that's needed?
I missed that discussion. I'll defer to Paul from OSU. I know go ahead, let's move on, and I'll think about it a bit. Let's go ahead and move on.
Okay. All right, so Board of Directors. This is the language we worked out last time. Everybody's had a chance to, I accepted the edits that were made during our last conversation. Anything else outstanding here?
So go ahead, Jeff.
We were just going to ask that the approval of the following be sale of carbon credits and or entry into easements or other encumbrances.
So instead of credit or projects, it would say
Credits. Sale of carbon credits. And or entry into easements.
So,
Or other encumbrances.
I'm just writing it
there-
out so people can see it. I'm not saying that you've accepted this.
No, thanks.
Is there anything you can do with carbon credits besides sell them? Can you alienate them in some other way?
I don't know if they're transferable to another party for sale. I think our
Okay.
our reason was that that's the transaction, and that can happen over time. You can have 1,000 carbon credits and decide to sell them all at once, or you can decide to sell them over 10, 15, 20 years, or you could decide to sell them to Joe Blow and not Jeff Huntington too. So it's anticipating the transaction.
Okay.
Yeah, that was I mean, I had a similar question and not really knowing, but could there be other carbon projects that are inclusive of the sale of carbon credits, but that we just haven't quite envisioned?
Yeah.
Let us work on it some more, okay? And I'll work with OSU, and maybe we can put a finer point on it. I get your point, and I didn't have that specific conversation with our folks on that. So I don't know the answer.
Anything else on the Board of Directors?
I had a question on new language that came up just below that, submittals. Was it really the intention to have any submittal to a federal or state regulatory agency have to be coming from the Board of Directors? If there's a, monthly monitoring report or whatever, are you wanting in legislation that something as broad as you've got?
No.
Bob, I think you're trying to talk, but you're on mute.
I think with something like that, Jeff, it gets delegated downward.
Yeah, you've got to file harvest
Okay.
notifications to the
right.
state just for fire protection reasons.
So that's fine. I guess yeah, you're right, Bob. We could delegate it, right? Or the board could delegate it. I just raised the question.
So the talking with the forest directors, they were adamant that the day-to-day operations, it needs to be spelled out that the board is not overseeing day-to-day operations, and that doesn't happen here. And they were concerned that biennial operations plan which they said is ended up being modified regularly. They're following the forest management plan to a T, but the operations plan is subject to daily change. And they said that is going to be a killer if that biennial operations plan needs to be approved and any updates approved by the board, because you'll just be turning and you'll get absolutely nothing done. And each one of them said it in one way or another.
So Tom, your suggestion is to delete the bullet that I have highlighted.
I would delete biennial operations plans.
Anybody have a concern with deleting that?
That's a very big change.
Well, the concern is that you will not be able to do any activity on the forest, because that plan, that operations plan is what people are functioning with on the forest and on a day-to-day basis. And that was one of the things Bob brought up a long time back, is we need to make sure that the day-to-day operations are under the control of the OSU and the research agenda, not being decisions that have to go back up to the board. They said that the biennial operation plan is in, you're following it, but you run into obstacles constantly that have to be adjusted to.
I'm not suggesting that. I guess I'm saying that an approval of a biennial operation plan at the beginning of the 2-year period is different than.
Then somehow we have to spell in the day-to-day operations are under the direction of OSU, because they felt like they were very concerned about the way that there's no authority for OSU anywhere in here. And yet you're expected to manage the forest. And
so I'll let the group deal with the day-to-day authority. The approval every 2 years of an operation plan that sets forth.
Yeah, I don't have
expectations
that
for the next 2 years is a cornerstone piece that we would have real trouble seeing disappear. If there's something additional that's necessary in order to address your concern and the working group wants to do that, we'll make sure it's addressed in the statute. But
that operational plans have to be mutable, that you have to be able to on the ground make decisions day to day. You can't have to go back to the board of directors. We don't even know what the board of directors looks like or who they are. We don't know if they're researchers or.
Tom, I think people are in general, I think I don't hear push back on that. I think it's a matter of where do we house the day-to-day authorities? Where do we encapsulate that?
I don't.
So I don't know what that actually looks like, that document, but I guess I would be curious, is that something that the board would want to see every other year and say, yeah, that seems right to us? And then they would get the biennial operations reports later and say, it looks like you had to make some adjustments, but you pretty much substantially followed it. Is that kind of how that goes?
I think that was yes, I think so. I think the concern is, go ahead.
Could you just go with like substantial revision? I hate using words like substantial, but could you just go with something like substantial revisions to the biennial operations plan? Or something like that? Would that resolve the concern?
Well, I think too, and I don't know if we need to spell out, the delegation authority of the board, but that could be a delegated item too, right? For changes to the plans based on how severe they are.
I don't think it needs to be in there at all. You've got a biennial operations report. You've got the annual budget. You've got a forest management plan that is the overarching document that covers all of it. And and Tom's right, and the people he talked to today are right, that if you have to have an operations plan that is approved, you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail every single time because things change out there. They change on, as they said, on a daily basis. I think it needs to come completely out, and we can't try and micromanage this thing.
I'm there too. I think that it opens up I don't want the state to reach down, and I don't want the board to reach down into the day-to-day operations of the forest either, right? That's not the board's task. And
There's a
I think-
concern that they're going to do something wrong. And like I say, we've got all these other things. We've got belts on and suspenders and belts over the suspenders. It's too much.
I think a lot depends on what this biennial operation plan looks like. I mean, obviously, it's gonna have some broad statements. It's not gonna go down to every last nail that gets hammered. It's gonna have to say, you know, our intent is to do X, Y, and Z, and this amount of road maintenance, and this amount of timber harvest. And to me, there's gonna be a lot of discretion within that biennial operation plan. It's not gonna be spelled out in the plan, and there will have to be day-to-day decisions on what goes where. So I guess I'm questioning if we're arguing about, does a biennial operation plan constrain daily managers? It shouldn't. It should be a big umbrella under which within they're doing their thing.
The big umbrella is the management plan, the HCP. I just don't think it needs to be in there.
Let me ask the question a different way then. If you're approving the annual budget, don't you want to know what their plan is to do with that money?
Well, if we've got a biennial operations report, what they're doing, the budget would include the bullets of what they're going to spend that money on.
Report's past tense.
Right, the way it was
spent the money
written,
on.
the report was, here's what we did the last 2 years. The operation plan sets out, here's where we're planning on harvesting in the next couple of years, 1,000 acres in this segment, and I think I agree with Mark. The intention was that it would be at a high enough level that all the discretion in the world could be given by the board and what's included in that plan. But the plan is the only thing that says where you'll be working in the forest for the next couple of years. The forest management plan won't necessarily shape that out, or doesn't have to.
How about if a bullet said that, you know, basically the board delegates the responsibility of the biennial operations plan fully to the executive director?
Tom, we couldn't agree to that. No way. I mean, that takes out any public review of that plan, any notice.
No, I didn't say that. I said that once the plan, I said, if you leave biennial operations plan in there as a bullet, approval of it, then a separate bullet written to say that it delegates the implementation of the approved plan to the executive director. And
doesn't that say that in the executive director section? That's the executive director's responsibility to implement?
I thought the discussion was though that the plan changes all the time,
plan does change.
which doesn't really get at the issue here.
If the plan is detailed, it might change. If the plan is written at a particular level, then a certain amount of change could happen without the plan changing.
That level is the forest management plan.
The forest
that
management
high
plan
level?
is a 10 years, at least a 10-year scope. So
Right.
I'm just going from the OSU.
High level, yes, I'm just saying, yes, agreed, Jeff. I'm just saying that that's the high level plan, is the forest management plan. The 2 years, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. And then you run into issues and problems and challenges that make it. I don't know, somewhere, Bob was the one that rightfully so suggested we need to make sure that the day-to-day operations aren't being encumbered by, because we lay out all of the restrictions, we lay out all the rules that the OSU needs to follow as managing the forest, but we don't make certain that the flexibility is there and that the opportunity is there to operate without having to go back to the board over and over again. And I
think
just
it's all
think
in how
somehow
you
we
write
need
the-
to make sure those day-to-day operations are allowed to occur.
I think
Part
it's
of
all in how you write the biennial operation plan.
Yeah,
I don't think it's gonna call out day-to-day operations.
I think it is the way it's written. And that was the concern that every one of these forest directors stated a moment ago. We then did a poll with them to get a sense of what they thought of the likelihood of success of the plan of, given the way we have the entity written currently. And 4 said unsure, 3 said no, and 0 said yes.
part of
Because
this
they feel
Biennial
that it just leaves there's no authority given to OSU to in anywhere in the document, and there's nothing specific about how those day-to-day operations are going to be executed without. There's lots and lots of here are the restrictions and rules. There's a lack of here's the license to operate.
So I have, just for purposes of trying to move the conversation forward here, inserted in the roles and responsibilities of the executive director, I don't know if this is the right language, but a responsibility here that says responsible for the implementation of the biennial operations plan, including day-to-day modification, any day-to-day modifications necessary or something like that.
Not modifications, operations. Operation on the forest. Because that's the responsibility, not for modifying. the
That's right.
biennial
That's
plan.
right. Good catch. Tom, does that get at your
Yeah, I
concern?
think that helps a lot.
And Bob, Mark, and others, is this acceptable to you?
Yeah, that part works for me.
Paul? Good.
And I think if you could scroll to the board's responsibilities for a minute on this point.
Yep.
Might be. It might be that, and I'm fine with this, if with it or without it, but you could add a bullet to the board's responsibilities so that the legislation is clear that the board has the authority to determine what needs to be in and included in biennial operations plans, so that there's not an argument later on about what's an adequate biennial operations plan based on what the Forest Service does or anybody else, but it's that the board and will work on determining what the scope and function of the biennial operations plan should include.
It says that, Jeff. It's approval of the following, I think, to me.
It talks about approval, but in nowhere did we say that the board can decide what an operation plan should look like, which I think is the crux of Tom's concern, if I'm hearing it. That
I think that's,
some operations
an
can be
important
detailed.
addition.
Okay,
Yeah, some operation plan could be down in the weeds and some could be up in the sky. And it can make a huge difference on day-to-day operations and the discretion of the executive director. So and I think a large part of this is we're dealing with a piece of legislation, and this is something that the board and the board is gonna, and the OSU are gonna have to work out what is an operations plan and what's the expectation and how long is the leash for 2 years at a time. Right, Tom?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that can be fully designed in a piece of legislation, is my point.
Right.
Is it just for the operation plan, or are there
Yeah,
other
the
elements?
biennial operation plan,
I think
scope and content.
that's the key. And I'm being fussy about this one because this is directly tied to the third-party right of action. And we're limiting third-party right of actions to particular documents and compliance with particular documents. So we want to get this right. And I do get your point, Tom. It's a good one. I'm not as worried about it as the guys that were looking at, that took the vote that you were talking about. But there's no reason why we can't deal with it in the legislation. So it's addressed.
Can we? Yeah.
Peter, I can work on a little bit of language on this too, if you'd
That's
like.
fine. Let's go ahead and move on because we're quickly running out
Great.
of time. So, thank you.
Okay. State Land Board, any outstanding questions or comments?
I hate to do this, but the last bullet on the board of directors has a submittal of a biennial programmatic review and an annual operations performance report, which is something new that was, I don't think, consistent with other parts of the document. The biennial operations reports were, at least when I left a week ago, were biennial.
Yeah,
or above.
it started because someone changed it to annual programmatic review and it was too much. And so then we said, well, we could do an annual update or something. And that was the sequence of how that got changed that way. Jeff, I'm happy with just striking it and sticking with biennial programmatic review.
And I think this goes directly to the state land board piece that's next, Peter.
Well, they were reconciled in the current text, Jeff.
Yeah, and I guess we're concerned about having annual operations performance reports to the state land board dictated in legislation that's for the next 100 years. Every year, there's going to be a report that's due to the board as in addition to what was a biennial programmatic review. And when we first had the conversations about how we keep the land board involved, but at arm's length also from the forest, the notion of annual involvement seems a bit much to have in the legislation from our perspective.
I totally agree.
If there's some transition time that you all think is really appropriate because you're nervous about until we get up and get our feet under us and everything's going okay, and you want to have an annual involvement or report to the board for the first 5 years while things are getting started that the legislation calls out, then that's that's something we can talk about. If you decide, the board decides it wants to send a report every year, that's the board's business, and the land board will open the mail. But having it in the legislation seemed more than we had contemplated when we included the land board section in this.
That's not my recollection, Jeff. I thought we talked about an annual report out to the land board at a public meeting.
We had a different recollection, which was why we had drafted the original draft as being a biennial programmatic review. Is the concern an ongoing one for 60 years out that we need annual reports, Bob, or is it really just the startup till we prove the concept is working?
I don't tend to think on this thing in 60 years out. I don't know what the world's going to look like in 60 years. It was definitely a concern in the the short term.
Give us a definition of short term.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was something we expected to see in there, I guess is what I would say. So that's why I changed it.
Let me ask you a question. Without this in legislation, cannot the state land board ask for a operations report at any time they desire or feel it's necessary?
Sure. the board of directors can submit it at any time if they want. It's what's dictated in the legislation that is always the worry. Then it's a commitment for checking a box.
It's an expensive item to do it every year. Forever.
If you're doing an annual operations report, why is it an expensive item to bring it before the land
It's
board?
another separate report.
No, it's the annual operations report. I mean, it's the one you're doing.
I think that if the board of directors elected to send that to the land board on an annual basis, they could. I think if we offered up 5 years while we get our wheels under us, or the board gets its wheels under them, I think that should be adequate. But commit to do that for forever, it's too much in my mind.
Sorry, I am slowly increasing chaos around me. How about 10 years?
About 6.5.
How about 7?
Well,
How about 6 3/4?
7.
How about 5?
All right, 8 years it is. And
I gained a year. I was going to go.
yeah, how did that happen?
Peter,
I should always be.
Hold on.
in my negotiation.
we have another number that we gotta negotiate. This one. How often do you want to commit the board to go to the public?
6, no less than 6.
I was going to say quarterly.
I was going to say 6, and I was going to compromise
Bob and I
with
agree.
4.
I'll go with 1 just so Peter gets to make be the referee here.
I'm not gonna make the decision.
You just did.
I like
I'll
it when
trade
Peter
you
gets pissed off and just like,
I'll trade you 6
things
meetings
up.
a year for 5 years on the reporting.
How about that, Bob?
let's talk through this practically, actually, just maybe. But do we think 6 is too much? I mean, Melissa, where are you at on? Why did you come up with 6? Because that's what I came up with as well. But
It's every other month. That seems reasonable. The board is engaged and involved, and it doesn't say how long the meetings have to be. But I feel like that things that come up could be addressed every other month, which gives the public a reasonable expectation of recourse if there's an issue they want to address at a public meeting.
And I guess that was my thinking as well, just because my experience with boards that meet less than that tend to be pretty detached. I think it's especially the foreseeable future. I think there's going to be an incredible amount of work to do to get this thing up and running, and there'll be bylaws and orientations and all kinds of stuff that's going to happen. I think this is the workload in the short run. It's not going to lend itself to quarterly meetings. And I think it's going to go on for a long time.
Depending
And
on
beyond that, okay.
I was going to say that my original number was 12 to start with, once a month to get this thing going and built, and the bylaws and all of that. All of the meetings are public.
But remember, this is the floor, not the ceiling, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the point of at least is then the public has a reasonable expectation of how often that board will be meeting. And again, we have learned a lot through COVID, and we've learned that we don't always have to travel for meetings. These meetings can be virtual. They don't have to be day-long meetings. So I feel like 6 is not an unreasonable number.
It's a nice round number. How about we do 6 and 6?
All right.
Is it possible, curious to hear, I mean, nowhere in this role of the board of directors is promoting the activities. I mean, I know it's for that purpose. It's just that everything is written around how we're going to, you know, ensure there's nothing that says the board of directors is going to work to ensure that the mission gets accomplished. Instead, it's a lot of checks and balances to make sure that we don't mess up and that we don't do things wrong. But I don't get the sense that there's the emphasis on making sure that the research gets on the ground and happens. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how it feels reading it.
Does the first bullet, and I'm aware of the time and also
Yeah.
that it's 6 o'clock, but I did want to point out, Tom, the first sentence, I think was the intent was meeting the mission objectives piece of that.
Yeah, maybe it could be just strengthened a bit. Let's not deal with it now. I just, if there is a way to strengthen that notion that the board of directors is there to make sure that that mission is accomplished, not to put breaks and blocks in place. Yes, let's do it. It has to absolutely be done right, but it has to be done. And I just don't, I don't know.
And Tom, you're right. And it ought to be the first statement, very simply, because we're designing a mission and that the board's agenda, the board's goal should be to meet that mission, not to do anything. I'm with Tom on that one. And that might be the first statement we make, just a single bullet. The board's principal goal is to blah, 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 the mission of the LAC.
Successful implementation of, or the execution of the mission of the entity.
Anybody have a concern about?
No, it's a point that should be driven home.
If people need to sign off, know that you are free to do so at this point. We know we're on borrowed time.
And I think this simple statement is simply a very effective insurance statement too. 60 years down the line, we don't know what a board looks like, or 5 years or 10 years or whatever down the line, and what that is. And it's simply a very powerful reminder that the board's intent is to meet the mission of the forest, or see that the forest meets its stated mission.
I don't know if I've got the words right, but you know what I mean.
Works.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Board of Directors, membership and composition. So we're at non-Senate confirmed. We've gone toggled back and forth between governor's office, land board, governor's office in consultation with the state land board. Seeing what we have here.
So we would like to weigh in. Again, this changed after I don't remember when it changed. When we agreed to the increased involvement of the land board, we put on the table that part of what we thought would be appropriate, given that increased involvement and oversight, was have the land board connected through the appointments process to the board of directors. And we still feel that way, as opposed to having the appointment process be one member of the land board.
I think that makes good sense. And in all likelihood, if the governor wishes this appointment, the vast majority of the time, one of the other two land board members are going to go along. But I think that Jeff's point is correct.
I agree. It's parallel. We've got the land board involved with the reporting twice a year, every year for the first 4 years. Did we decide? 6 years? 6 years. So it would make sense then to not change it here and have the full land board.
Anybody have a problem with land board appointments? Going once, going twice, 3 times, sold to the land board.
You'll want to make the adjustment to the first bullet at the land board section as well, when the time comes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, and then composition, anything on this?
When we agreed that the dean should not be a voting member, we had more authority for OSU in the with the my recollection is we had a more clear connection between OSU and the executive director, but now the executive director answers to the board of directors. And does it make sense to have the dean a voting member then? It just seemed like that something changed. But when we said, oh yeah, okay, then he shouldn't be voting or she shouldn't be voting. I just don't know what that change was. And then again, OSU has so little authority here, but they do have the dean's membership on the board.
Are you suggesting that we have Dean on the board as a voting member?
I was questioning that, yes. I raised the question.
I would say it's appropriate.
I'm good.
Mark?
I guess just sort of in terms of balance and power, I don't see the dean as a voting member of the board. The board's responsible for this. The dean's going to have a lot of input. The dean's going to be central to all this, but the dean's not on the board of directors, and OSU's not in an ownership position, and it's really those responsibilities lie with the board of directors, not with the dean. So I'm not minimizing the importance and the role of the dean. I'm just not
Right.
sure that it's a board.
Well, yeah,
position.
and I was the one that threw out that at the time that I shouldn't be, or that the dean shouldn't be a voting member, but we've moved to such a position where even the way that it's described how the hire will take place, I'm okay with it. We can leave it non-voting member. I just want to make sure that when it comes, there is accountability for the OSU research staff that's on the forest. That, I mean, we're talking about a board of directors 20 years down the road or 30 years down the road with a different land board. And we have an executive director appointed by the land board with consultation from OSU.
Not the land board, but the board of directors, but yes.
Yeah, board of directors, excuse me. Yeah, anyhow, we don't.
Realistically, if
I
you're,
just think it's a conflict of interest that's better avoided. by
Yeah,
having
I
a
agree,
board.
Mark, about the conflict of interest, and it does look, it's way better as a non-voting member, but then perhaps we could assure that the membership of the board includes people that are researchers and recognize the research, the value
Yeah,
of
I'm not
research.
sure I think I would call this a conflict of interest. I mean, we are not, OSU is not necessarily a contractor in this. We're a partner agency, and I think the voting voice within the board would be appropriate. It could go either way, but there is the essential nature of research on the forest, and do we have a voice to research that is sitting at the board level and has some authority as well with the other members.
Well, I think.
I would say
you know,
that
I think-
person has a lot of opportunity to have their voice heard. Just because they don't have a vote doesn't negate their spot on the board. And frankly, it's the only dedicated seat on the board. Everything else is up for grabs.
Right.
I think things shifted a little bit also when we began to contemplate a contract to OSU for management of the forest that'll be administered by the board and have to be, the terms of which would have to be enforced by the board. It
Right.
would seem like it could be an awkward spot to
Yeah.
have the dean be
Yeah.
voting on that, on contract issues.
I get it.
So help me out, folks. I know we're over time by a stretch here. I could take a crack at incorporating feedback from today, accepting changes where I think it's appropriate, obviously pending you all's review, and know that we have additional work to do on public accountability, placeholders for decoupling, as well as protections. But I do not think we probably have enough time tonight to get through all of those. So my feeling would be that we maybe do as much work as we can to integrate feedback from today, work offline to try to resolve some of this stuff. I'm happy to try to schedule a meeting on Friday if people are available to try to work through these last sections. Up to you. And Jeff, maybe in doing that, do you and Malia have a timeline when would you want to get something in to Ledge Council? Because we're also going to have another go at all of this.
I guess,
We had planned as soon as this meeting was done, we would start moving forward with what we had agreed to. If there's going to be, if you want to work again on it this week, then we can stand pat till this week. We just don't want to put it off another week.
Jenna is reminding me we have a meeting scheduled on Friday afternoon. Let's make a run at it on Friday afternoon. Plan to submit by close of business on Friday. In the meantime, we'll work to get you a cleaned up version.
thanks, Peter.
Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.